here when were you last here, and what's it like to be back and have things moving more in a normal direction?
I'm trying to recall. I don't think we came last year.
Yeah.
As I recall.
Yes.
And so it would have been the year before. And why I remember that is I took one afternoon and went over to Houston and spoke at the memorial for Bob McNair of the Houston. And so that was a wonderful thing to get to be a part of, but it sure postmarks or earmarks when I was here last.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at all the success y'all had in the draft and free agency last year, what can you take from that with your personnel evaluations this year?
Well, I think that I feel very comfortable that, and have for years, that we put that board up very well. I've always been comfortable, even 20 years ago, that our board was very sound. You have to really, to answer that and think about the Senior Bowl, you have to answer your question, okay, the board is up there. Now, what do you look at when you take your pick down off that board? Yeah. Because you're going to have 300 people up there or more, and you're going to pick 8 or 9. And so when I keep that in mind when I'm here, I like to evaluate the scouts, and I like to pick their mind a little bit about what they're thinking, they're looking at, and what have you, and then I compare that with what a coach says, or frankly what other teams and scouts and coaches say about the player. And a lot of us forget that, but between what you see ESPN and all the drafts and all of that, when you look at that draft board, you've actually had a lot of input, and we get that. Of course, the other part of the input is the combine.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you've got to realize that it's not the numbers and looking at all the players. It's really understanding that player you pick, because that's all that really counts, that player you pick.
Right.
And that's a small percent of what we're looking at. So I think of all that when I'm sitting here watching these players, and we've got a good look at what the offensive linemen are doing out here. We had extensive meetings this morning before we came over and reviewed these players that we're going to be looking at this afternoon a lot, and had some advanced scouting from the coaches that had gone to these schools or had studied them before we got here.
Right.
You said last week that you were pretty optimistic that Kellen will be back with y'all. Do you have a further read on that? And regardless of what the future is for him, how do you kind of handle the thought of a contingency plan if he does leave?
Well, first of all, that was as much hope as it was knowledge that I thought that he was going to be back, and it had more to do with other people other coaches getting jobs with several of the teams that might have been interested in Kellen. It was in no way trying to send any messages to Kellen, or to certainly Kellen, but to send messages to teams. And I feel, as we sit here today, that we've got a good chance of maintaining him. And it was said in context with what we really did hard work on was to maintain Dan Quinn. And I felt that had a lot of different things, advantages. And I mentioned that I was so pleased with how we had stayed in communication with Dan, stayed in communication with his representatives, and how Mike had spent time and had his pulse talking to him, because all of us wanted Dan to stay. That was a key to our continuity here. I feel real good that Mike, who has a very comfortable background on moving the football, passing game, running game, offensive side of the game. So when you think about in the weeds, getting down in the weeds, the offensive line, its technique and blocking. Then I like the fact that we've got Mike as our head coach. He's spent a lot of his life looking at ways to attack defensive and move the ball. And so he gives us a good safety net there with whatever we're looking at relative to the coordinator or calling the plays.
He's mentioned how with the Cowboys and with y'all, it's been much more almost like CEO. Not that he's not involved, but it's more like letting Kellen do what's best for him and empowering him. And same with Dan. Would you consider him going back to calling plays, and would that take away from some of the ways that the operation has been running?
Yeah, well, it's a fine line and an art to basically embolden. As a head coach, embolden the coordinator to have the freedom and to use his skills and his decision on how best to attack. It's a fine line than being an overseer or a governor or a major thwart by influencing his ability to not do his job, but just absolutely to maybe excel. That's a fine line. On the other hand, the coordinator himself does and should appreciate the great reservoir of skill and experience that a guy like Mike McCarthy has. And so the key thing is that we have both. And I do expect and would expect that should a coordinator, in Kellen's case, especially on the offensive ball with Mike, that they would reconcile how they were going to block that defense or how they were going to approach it from the standpoint of the receiver and how we basically run and pass. I would expect Mike to have influenced but not basically intruded.
Yeah.
And so that's always the experienced with the bright idea, inexperienced, and that combination. Mike is excellent at this. He has excellent skills. He has excellent communication skills. He has the right demeanor. He is, what he's interested in is the best interest of our success, and then he's not interested in not having any assistant coach or coordinator grow or be recognized for his skills. And so that's a fine line. It's a mouthful. But the ones that work at the best, there's a time to be stubborn. There's a time to say, let's no. And that's what head coach means. But there's also a time to, to open your mind. And that's what we're getting here. And I've enjoyed it. I've seen it in a lot of head coaches. I've had a head coach that, for all practical purposes, he was everything that the offense was. And it was his offense. He was the, when you saw a play, it was his play. And I've seen it go the other way. I've seen it go both ways during the season and change during the season. What I'm mainly interested in, and I know this is a mouthful, but what I'm mainly interested in is our ability to adjust. It is incumbent on us not to wait until installations in the off season or wait until the off season to adjust. The season is season is a marathon. It's a season of adjustment. You can be playing good, playing bad, playing good, playing bad, and then play good and win the Super Bowl. And that's what we're into here. It's months long.
Did the offense fail to adjust like it needed to the last couple months of the season?
Yes, and or we'd be in Super Bowl. But yes, and you could say that about all sides of the ball. But that's what it's about. It is about, to a large degree, adjusting. But it's also while you need a portfolio in your offense that is fresh, so that when you got your matchups in the postseason, that teams you're playing are seeing things that they might not have seen you do during the regular season. That's good if you can do it. But you don't need to abandon things that with repetition you've done hundreds of times, and that's the best thing you do. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
And so somehow you've got to incorporate, when you're playing in a postseason game, some fresh stuff, some unexpected stuff. But you've got to rely on your players getting the benefit of all that repetition, and they run the play just like they were breathing. They don't have to think about it.
Right.
A lot of the talk from outsiders coming out of that 49er loss is addressing the offensive line, improving it going into the season. How have you thought about that, and what are your thoughts on improving that group heading into the season?
Well, and I would be at this particular time looking at immediate improvement as well as long-term improvement, and that goes with every phase of the team. On the offensive line, as to your question, I can see one that would have more discipline relative to the penalties. And I could see an offensive line that is able to be more physical, which means possibly doing the things that you're the most used to doing, that you've done hundreds of times since training camp. So I would see that as a way to get that continuity. And I think the thing that we can improve on there is continuity. And you say, well, what do you do about injuries? You're sure to have them. Well, that's why we're down here. We're looking for players that have position flex. We're looking for players that can block a zone, can block gaps. We want players that are capable of doing any technique and any offensive line design that our coaches want to do. But the idea being players that can do more than one thing, and then it's up to the coach to not ask them to do more than they're capable of, because they've got a little problem. They've got defensive people over there, especially when they get in the playoff, that if they hesitate a second and have to think about what they're doing, they'll be up in the quarterback's face.
Yeah. On that note of coaches helping challenge players but not push them too much, you told us last year at the draft with Micah, pressure, pressure, pressure. And I think some of us were like, but isn't he a linebacker? Are we sure? And he totally exceeded expectations. What works so well for Micah being able to take on why do you think he was able to take on so many different roles at such a high level immediately?
Yeah. Well, at this stage, I couldn't compare Michael to any player that I know or know of. I don't have a comparison because of his unique ability to not only pressure, with burst and with bend and with just sheer mental assets to put pressure. Combine that with his ability to give us coverage and plus internally be the example that he is to other players as well as to our opposing players. He's got all of those, and so he's going to invent the Micah player.
That's awesome. When you hear that he's going to lunch with D-Ware the week of the playoffs to try and get that extra edge, how much does that fire you up that he's doing those little things?
I just think it's ambition at its highest example. When you talk to experienced, accomplished people and you talk to them specifically to ask them to tell you how they do things, you honor them. It makes them feel so good that someone wants them to give them some of what they have experienced and what they frankly have accomplished. My experience has been not Harvard business or not Harvard degree, but talking to successful people about how they did it. Greatest outpouring of knowledge, and you usually can't shut them up. And they'll give you so much more than you could have ever dreamed. And the higher they've been up the ladder, the more they'll give you. And on a personal basis, I've looked people up and never met them, just to tell them that I wanted to talk to them about how they did it. And I've done that a lot.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I'm sure this stuff all happens at once. Like, I get it doesn't just happen in individual moments, but what's kind of the process for transitioning from evaluating the end of this season, this team, this staff, to figuring out the decisions you have to make for free agency and draft and things like that?
Well, I think it's important to, without sounding like arm waving, I think it's important to do some serious soul searching while the wound is open, and I think it's important to get salt in it and really bear down on the need to find out how you can improve while it's hurting. And I actually believe that you have more focus and you have more, you're more receptive to change at that time than you ever are when you've had success. And on a personal basis, my best days have been in down times and having hard times than ever success. I've made mostly C's and D's with my successful times.
Yeah. Have you had conversations with Randy about coming back? And you have several free agents, but with someone like Randy, who you've stuck behind in such a unique way, how confident are you that he'll be on this team in 2022?
Well, I feel so comfortable with Randy that I think we can sit there and just look at each other and not say a word, but we're talking up a storm. I feel that way.
Yeah.
And I believe he does too. And so I've had a chance down here to meet with his agent and had a good visit there, but certainly we're taking the steps to look to see how we go forward.
How confident are you that it'll work?
Oh, I'm knowing our time together.
Yeah.
And some of the pluses and some of the times that we've had to work through not so fun things. That'll serve us well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, the league dealt with some pretty big news relating to Brian Flores and the lawsuit. Where do you think the league is on the Rooney Rule relative to where it needs to be, and what was your reaction to that lawsuit?
Oh, I think the fact that it's an issue shows not only the league's willingness to address and do better. I think the fact that it's being discussed as to how the Rooney Rule or what drives the Rooney Rule could be better. In the case of Coach Flores' complaint, he's saying it could be better, and the processes create a positive result for the league.
Absolutely. Do you think how can it be better?
Well, we just have to keep your head down and keep trying to do it. By the very complaint, it addresses that we're trying, and everybody's trying to come up with ways to do better that basically works, that can work. And so I don't have any thing as far as input relative to his situation, their situation, and the things that have been talked about. I don't have any knowledge or any input there. What I do know is that I can see that the area, one of many in the NFL, that we can do better. the area has some good attention.
Mm-hmm.
That this is obvious. If you look through that, you'll see that the league and the coaches and everybody are trying to improve there.
Yeah, it's not necessarily.
And I think that's the best we can be. We're a league of many boxes, of all kinds, in many, many areas. And I never dreamed that we can check as many boxes that we can check. But the more we become substantive, and we're a lot more substantive as a league and as a sport than we ever were when I got involved 30-something years ago, and we're more substantive and more pertinent and germane than we were 10 years ago. The more that happens, the more boxes we're going to have come up that we need to check, and we're going to do a good job on some of them, and we're going to have work to do on others.
Yeah, last question.
It'll never stop.
Right.
It really won't ever stop. We'll always, as long as this league is continuing to be, and if we will grow, but as long as we continue to be the dominant, not dominant, but influence that we are.
By the ratings dominant.
By everything, by the interest in the game, by continuing to try to improve overtime, by continuing to try to improve so many things. That list of boxes that needs addressed will get bigger.
Yeah.
And we'll have to spend more time checking more boxes. But I welcome that.
Yeah.
How would you like for nobody to even be interested or nobody to even be able to look at it and have no boxes to check?
Yeah. Absolutely. What would you tell fans who say multiple coaches of color were fired this offseason, Mike Tomlin's the only black coach in the league? How do you discern between wanting to be substantive with who you're hiring but also realizing just the discrepancy between the 70% black players and the coaches?
Well, I can't and shouldn't. I've never been in any interviews other than the ones I've conducted.
Right.
And so that's all I can speak to. The other conversations you have as owners or as, in my case, the general manager, which that's my ultimate responsibility and job is to hire the coaches. And so other than my own personal experience, I wouldn't want to comment on anyone else's. I have observed through media and otherwise how people go at trying to find the best way to put a coaching staff together. And I do know that it's obviously challenging. And I know that at the end of the day, there's only going to be one, and that's the case of a head coach, one out of 32 ever so often that ultimately does what you want them to do, and that's win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And so we all have that, as to what's successful, we all have that in mind. All of the other issues are all of those other boxes that come up. And I know but I don't have anything to say about how any other team goes about its interview, goes about its processes, and what have you. I don't have any comment on that.
Stephen talked to us yesterday about doing everything in your power to help Dak, that being a priority. What does that look like to you? Like when you think about how doing everything you can to help Dak, what would be your top priority?
Well, I would say that the things that we want to be as cognizant of the fact that you need to protect your quarterback. We're in a lot worse shape if whatever we do with our team, the result ends up with Dak not playing because of injury. That's going in the wrong direction. So you immediately go to protection, or you immediately go to a run game that gives you a less physical way to work. My biggest concern would be the physical risk that you have when you lose your quarterback. And my concern would be, since I'm fresh off of 2 seasons in a row of losing parts of the season or most of the season.
Yeah.
So I'm very concerned. And when I look back at some of the great quarterbacks that I've had a chance to be involved with the Cowboys, injury has always been at the front. If I look back at any one common denominator that made me the sickest, it was the injury. So safety comes to my mind, and a system that gives you the ability to let him be what he can be as the leader and quarterback of the team, but do it in a way that we've got him all the way through so that we can win a Super Bowl. One of the things that's the hardest to accept, but is a fact, is as we went into the playoffs this year, how healthy we were and how complete we were of having our very best ready to play. And the most and readiest to play as far as health is concerned physically that I've ever been associated with. And so it was so disappointing to miss that opportunity in these playoffs.
Right.
But then, of course, we've got to then go to my next priority, and that would be do things that give us the best chance that Dak can execute things that he uniquely can do. We all know of his he's a man that men will follow. That's a big thing. He's a man that can incite a physical approach and his physical game, and he can incite that. And so those are major pluses. And then as far as physically being able to make the plays, we unquestionably know that he can make the plays. We've seen him do it. And we're not worried about anything that has to do with the gravity of the game or the pressure of the game. So we've just got to get it so that when we get the ball and it's 30 seconds left on the clock or a minute left on the clock, that we get it in the end zone. Now that's simplistic, but again, the best thing we start with as we look at how to go forward, the very best thing we start with is our position at quarterback with Dak.
When you're 12-5 but no playoff wins, and the first half of the season throws the offensive rhythm, the second half less so, how would you grade Dak's first season on this contract?
Well, I've had it both ways. I've been 12-5 and not been to the playoffs. I mean, not go far in the playoffs, and I have not been in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I'd rather be 12-5 and get to the first game of the playoff.
Yeah.
So let's start with that right there.
Yeah. But how
I'd rather be there. I can handle that better than I can not having even gotten there at all.
Yeah.
And so, and I've had both.
Yeah.
And now I've also been a part of 3 Super Bowls.
Right.
Okay. And I do better when we win 3 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
With my personality.
Yeah. And with Dak's role specifically this year, how would you grade how he performed?
I think I think we performed to 12-5. I think Dak performed to 12-5, and that was hard. And he had to do some good things, and he had to overcome some injury. But I think we performed to 12-5. That's his grade. It's his grade right there. And then his grade is we lost in the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's the grade.
Right.
Okay, so the question is, can we do better in the playoff with Dak? And the answer is yes. It's a big yes for me.
Yeah. How close do you think you are to being a Super Bowl contender of a team?
I'll take you let me get right back with exactly the same players,
Yeah.
or the makeup of the same players, as healthy as we were.
Yeah.
Get me right back here, and I'll take that and not at all complain.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I won't go to sleep if I can get back to that and get in a game with us at 12-5.
Yeah.
And the same place in the rankings of the pecking order after we get in the playoffs. I'll take it just like that and not ask for a penny more, but then I want to play better in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I mean, there's so much turnover in the NFL, as everybody is aware. How do you feel about your situation with the cap and those types of decisions? Do you feel like you have a good grasp on what y'all might have to decide here in the next month or so?
It is the ongoing. It never ever rests. It's just like the clock, tick, tick, tick. If you're sleeping, it's still ticking. The cap and the management is heart surgery. And if you try to put a Band-Aid on it, and then you probably will pay for the fact you just put a Band-Aid on it rather than got it fixed permanently.
Yeah.
But we live with the cap. It's the resource. It is there, and there's never been a year that is the same. We have challenges. We do have challenges. Again, looking back, it's going to be hard for us to get the same talent
Right.
on the field going in. Now, when you have guys like Cox that show up and become a star for you, when you have Wright become a star, when you have these players that are here, where is Parsons? Now you say, well, that's dreaming there. No, you're going to have, if given them the opportunity, if necessity dictates, you're going to have those guys come up. I can't even say which one it will be. They can't say which one it will be. Nobody can say which one it will be. But if we will work hard and give them the exposure, we will have that happen for us. And we'll do some of that in free agency and have that happen for us as well. It won't be the same way. It'll have us happen for us as well. The constant here is we've got some great coaches, and we've got great staff. It was a major coup to get Quinn, to have him here. And if we can have the continuity we want there, that'll be a big deal, and that'll give us the best chance. I'll assure you there will be adjustments in what we do, both offensively and defensively. There will be adjustments, and Mike will do some things differently than he did last year. There's no question about it.
When you say it's a coup to get Dan here, did he have a head coaching opportunity or offer?
With Quinn, the answer is yes. My answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because when you said on radio, I believe so, fans were like,
well,
well,
but
did
the
he or
answer
didn't he?
the answer is I realize I saw where somebody said, well, how do we know that? Well, I don't know that because do you think a club checks with me and says we're going to do that or we're not going to do that? I wouldn't with them. But first of all, my conviction is sounder than most because he's the most sought-after coach out there. Would we all agree on that? More interviews, more. Did anybody? As a matter of fact, you may have written yourself. He was the number one guy leading up the deal. Okay, so my thought that he got and could have been a head coach has a lot of credibility just from the smoking guns. I mean, I would rest, but I'd like to think that opinion that he could have been a head coach, that everybody'd say, now, by the way, that doesn't take much of a reach because he's the most active one in being interviewed.
Yeah.
And so the point is that he could have been a head coach. In my mind, there's no doubt that he could have been. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I know because I've had, as I mentioned, I've had it happen 3 times. Now, 3 times. 3 times. Quite similar circumstances. And he did stay here. He stays here because there's always and always has been, with every coach, the idea that of every one of those 3 coaches have said they'd love to be the head coach of the Cowboys. Yeah. Okay? Every one. And so my point is that that has, in my mind, that has a lot of logic as to why they might not take a job now rather than one or wait and see how the cards go in future. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so do you view Dan
it has
as
to be. You couldn't do this if you weren't an attractive place to be a coach.
Right.
You couldn't get people to not take or to not do it if it weren't a very attractive place to coach.
Do you consider
Here, not that he's said that he'll be here, but my point is you couldn't do that. And that was the case with all three of the coaches that have turned down opportunities.
Do you consider Dan a potential future head coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
But he's certainly qualified. He's very qualified. Yes, I would consider. If I didn't have a coach, I would have been interviewing him for coach.
Yeah. It's a good problem to have, right? Or a good
it's wonderful.
situation to
It's
have
wonderful.
two in your
Now,
building.
when you say that, make sure that, not that I said it, but that the facts are nobody worked harder to keep Dan here than Mike. It was the plan. That's what that was the plan. And so pure and simple. And I've seen some people say, well, what was the rationale behind that? The rationale behind that is, or not rationale, is that was a highly competitive way. Okay? And I wanted them to be thinking about that they were talking to a guy that could be head coach of the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Could be.
What does Mike say when you do that?
Huh?
He's
Well,
like,
Mike-
it's fine because I know internally
well,
I'm secure.
but Mike knows that someday somebody will be coach of the Cowboys other than him. He
He's not
knows
gonna be
that.
for all time.
That's my whole point. Come on, but the whole point is that in all cases with Jason as well as Sean, we were in the back of their minds as far as our job.
Right.
And so I'm not speaking to Dan, but I will tell you right now, it is an advantage
Does that, and I mean,
to keep a coordinator from taking another job. That's an advantage.
Right. For sure.
there's so much speculation on the outside about it. Do you worry about maybe the pressure that puts on Mike?
Not at all. No, I don't. And Mike's good in his skin. I'm good in his skin with where we are. And it's, as Jimmy Johnson told me one time, okay, I wanted to do a 20-year deal. Instead, I did a 10. And I personally guaranteed it, not the Cowboys, me, with Jimmy. And I said, because the Cowboys' signature is not worth anything. The Cowboys were broke when he came in. And so I personally guaranteed it and offered it and did and personally guaranteed it. And then he said, the Landry thing, which at the time they'd only had one coach, the Landry thing that's not reality. And that's not how coaches think. They don't think in terms of forever.
Yeah.
In terms of like that. Well, I thought that way because when I bought them, it was forever. So I think forever. And so my point was that we were just a different thought. And so my point is that everybody recognizes, all you got to do is look at the record of the NFL over the last several years. And Belichick, I guess, is the longest tenured, and there have been two or three that were the longest tenured. We happen to be a franchise that has the world record for tenure in Tom Landry. But there are some other really long tenured examples. But my point is that with my philosophy as well as what we have practiced, I wanted the situation as to Dan's courting, the clubs that courted Dan.
Yeah.
I wanted the aura to be friendly to Dan staying
Yeah.
and turning down head coaching jobs.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And so that's my logic, and I'll put my
It
logic.
worked.
I'll put my logic with anybody.
I know some of this is out of your control, but do you have a time frame for when this coaching staff, and just a loose idea of when it might be finalized?
Well, everybody that I want under contract's under contract. And maybe some that are under contract that might have a change, but still, everybody that's under contract. So I'm finalized. The only thing left for me is to respond if there becomes a change. And again, I can't speak to Kellen's situation and maybe some individual position. But as far as I'm concerned, and I said this last week, I've got everybody on the contract that I'm good with, did then.
Did you have a conversation with Dak either in the locker room after San Francisco or in the days that followed? And if so, what does he say to you after a season ends in disappointing fashion?
No, we don't. I have had conversation with him after the game, and we basically responded just as you'd speak. A couple of disappointed guys talking. Mm-hmm. And not gilding the lily, but also I felt that it reflected two men that have a bright future in mind.
Yeah.